slides?
I don't know if he wants to speak from the podium.
I think.
Morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Weiss. I'm Vice President for Studies here at Carnegie. And again, I'd like to, as we've done earlier, express our appreciation to the Sasakawa Foundation and to Admiral Blair for having the vision to put on this exciting event today. We have three very good speakers for this next session, which is going to look at the regional security environment in Northeast Asia and how the Russian-Japan relationship is being affected by those significant changes in East Asia that have been alluded to in the first panel between Ambassadors Togo and Panov. Three speakers have agreed to speak for about, say, 7-10 minutes each. To sort of set the tone, then we'll have a short discussion among the four of us before opening things up for the exchange with you in the audience. We'll start things now with Professor Izumi Sumikawa from Choa University, and after that, Vasily Kashin, who's an analyst at CAST, Russian, I guess I'd say think tank or defense contractor, depending on your perspective, which studies the region, and former Russian diplomat and Professor Georgy Toleraya. So with that, Professor Izumikawa, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Andrew, for a nice introduction. My name is Yasu Izumikawa. I'm a professor at the Chuyo University, and I'd like to extend my gratitude and appreciation to the Sasakawa Foundation and the Carnegie for inviting us all. And it's actually nice to be back here because back in February this year, I was here invited by my friend Jim Schaaf, who is sitting right here, to talk about Japan-Russia relations. And it was an interesting experience because 90% of my speech was about Japanese-Russian relations, but most of the question I got was about comfort women. So, thinking about that, the fact that the whole conference today is devoted to the Japan-Russia issue is really great. Okay, so, yeah, we can talk about that later, okay? Okay, today I'd like to present the strategic and security viewpoint of Japan-Russia relations from the Japanese perspective. Of course, this is my personal observation, so I hope that we can discuss, how it converges or diverges from the views that's going to be presented by our Russian colleagues afterwards. Okay, well, after the Ukrainian crisis and even the Russian intervention into Syria, some people may sort of question, like, why still the Japanese government under Prime Minister Abe is still sort of trying to seek the better relationship with Russia. But I would like to sort of rephrase the question just for thought experiment, and why shouldn't Japan? Okay, why should not? After all, the Cold War is over for more than 20 years or 30 years, and there's no security obstacle in a way to resolve the territorial issue, which Ambassador Togo and Panov already mentioned, that there's no sort of a security perception between Russia and Japan anymore. And the economic and energy aspect is also promising between the two countries, especially after the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. And the former residents of the four islands, the Japanese former residents, do they really care about this sovereignty issue? Well, actually, no. My friend, Aki Iwashita, whose name just came up in the previous session, now teaching at the Hokkaido University. His research and some of the interviews that my students actually conducted with the former residents basically shows that they really don't care too much about that. They only care about the freedom of to be able to visit their previous homes or something like that. So there are some reasons why Japan is still interested in better relationship with Russia and hopefully trying to resolve the territorial issue. That said, of course, the initiative that came with the rise of Abe to power again in 2012 really sort of heightened the interest in seeking the breakthrough between Japan and Russia. And the main reason, which I guess is obvious already, is about the strategic perspective, especially the rise of China. Okay. Well, rise of China is, of course, the probably the most important security challenge to Japan, and this influences Japan's approach toward Russia in mainly three ways, I would argue. One is basically sort of simple balance of power consideration. As China's power rises and Japan's power relatively shrinks, it's important for Japan to reach out more friends in the region, as well as the United States. And of course, Russia sits to the north of China, and Russia could be a nice sort of counterweight vis-a-vis China. I'm not saying that the Russia and Japan would create a sort of China coalition, or Japan is trying to contain China or anything like that. That would be stupid. I'm just saying that the fact that Russia remains very independent of Chinese influence, that's very important for Japan. Okay, and secondly, the rise of China sort of creates the situation in which Japan's strategic, some people call Japan's strategic pivot towards the south. Of course, the still security challenges remain in the Korean Peninsula with North Korea as it is, but because of the increasing Chinese maritime activities and problems in the south, Japan's sort of strategic focus is gradually but steadily shifting towards the south. And as it happens, the problem in the north, mainly the Northern Territory issue and Russian sort of continuing sort of, military sort of conducts in northern part becomes a kind of irritant in a way. And so it's kind of reasonable for the Japanese government to try to resolve the issue in the south so that it can focus more on the south. Okay. The third, this is something that I didn't develop too much in the paper that I presented for this conference, but probably the rise of China create a situation in Japan that the Japanese government or Japanese politicians could use that issue to explain to the Japanese domestic public that maybe some kind of territorial compromise is necessary between Japan and Russia, because the issue regarding China is so huge in the public eyes these days that they can use rhetorically. I mean, they meaning Japanese politicians. They can use that issue politically to sell when it's necessary to the Japanese public that, well, we're going to have to cut the deal with Russia, so let's do that. Okay, so these are the reasons why the rise of China is important. The other important reason why the Abe administration is so interested in improving relations with Russia is the leadership issue. I understand how the Mr. Putin is viewed in this town, but in Tokyo, Mr. Putin, well, surprise, surprise, is regarded as the Russian leader who is personally interested in improving the relations with Japan, and also interested in resolving the territorial issues. And that's important. Therefore, there is a sort of incentive for the Japanese government to try to do the best as it can to move things forward when he's in power, and especially when he has grips on the domestic situations. The leadership factor is important in Tokyo too. Mr. Abe, is the part of the LDP factions led by the former Prime Minister Mori, and Mori was, of course, the Putin partner when he was a prime minister. And even before that, Abe was the secretary of his father, the then foreign minister Shintaro Abe, back in the late 1980s when Japan was starting to explore approaching the Russia during the Gorbachev era. Okay, so from that kind of experiences, he probably was determined to move forward on Japan-Russia relations. And at the same time, the fact that he is supported by the kind of a group, whom you might call nationalists in Japan, might be a helpful issue because here, Nixon going to China kind of a dynamic could work because when the Japanese government needs to resolve the territorial issue, it has to seek some sort of a compromise, as I said, and then, the kind of people who criticize the Japanese government for any kind of compromise on this issue tend to be the same kind of group who would support Mr. Abe. So those kind of criticisms could be muted if things that happen during the Abe's sort of reign. Okay, so those are the Japanese views. Okay, so how then Russia views toward Japan? I mean, this of course is my personal observation of how Russia looks towards Japan. And here, I think the security issue has become more important than before. That's definitely one aspect. And as some people have already mentioned, the rise of China is creating some concerns, at least, in Russia as well. And especially China's expansion into the Arctic Ocean also creates a kind of situation in which Russia feels that it could be encircled by China. So this sort of new security angle of possible Japan-Russia cooperation has been emphasized, especially by the Japanese-Russia experts, many of them. But at the same time, I would argue that there are some divergent views between Japan and Russia vis-a-vis China. Because, simply put, China is very important for Russia, more important for Russia than maybe for Japan. It's true that Russia may be feeling some kind of security concerns from China, but at the same time, China is just next to Russia, and it would be very, very bad idea for Moscow to worsen the relationship with China in its attempt to move closer to Tokyo. Okay, and China becomes even more important when Russia's relationship with the West is bad, and it is very bad now. So, simply speaking, I mean, for Russia, Russia has a lot more to gain or to lose from its relationship with China than for Japan. And Japan needs to recognize that. Okay. So what are the implications of these factors for Japan and the U.S.-Japan relations? First, I think it's reasonable for the Japanese government to pursue the better relationship with Russia and hope to resolve the territorial issue. But at the same time, Japan needs to be pragmatic about the cost and benefits of what it could gain from better relationship with Moscow. As I said, there's a limit to which Russia can move in sort of this Russia, Japan, China triangle. And if Japan or Tokyo expects too much from Russia, that's not going to work. And most likely, I would argue that the better relationship with Tokyo would enable Russia to sort of bargain better, to enhance the bargaining position vis-a-vis China. So it helps Russia in a way that it can deal with China from the better improved positions, but not probably as much as Japan might hope. Japan needs to be pragmatic and realistic about that. But at the same time, as I said, because of the outstanding issues, I mean, Japan should pursue any, the window of opportunities to improve relationship with Russia. Mr. Togo said, the dual strategy probably doesn't work on neither side, and maybe true, but the important thing is the timing, and probably as the way things going in Ukraine and Syria, it's not the right time probably, but Tokyo needs to seek the better time maybe, but it really has to be sensitive about the possible opportunity. Okay. The second implication for the U.S.-Japan relations. This is the issue I would think that the policy coordination between the two capitals, Tokyo and Washington, need to be smooth, and it has to be not one way but two-way street. And in addition, this policy coordination, I hope, is not just about sort of exchange of information about what to do and what the government did to Moscow or something like that, but I hope that it would start with the sort of joint assessment of the possible relationship or the nature of the relationship between Moscow and Beijing, because this is strategically significant. Well, back in February, I interviewed some people, think tank people or people in the government, and I realized that the sort of underlining assumption in the United States is that Russian and Chinese relationship are not going to move too close because they have inherent problems between the two. It may be true, okay? But interestingly, I would argue that the same assumption is held by Tokyo, but the Tokyo's policy goes into the totally different direction. And Tokyo believes that Moscow and Beijing are divided. Therefore, Tokyo sees the opportunity to sort of win Russia away from China or something of that nature. Okay, so it seems that both capitals seems to sort of look at the same assumption without, examining what it really is empirically and moving on to the policy of their own respective preferences. So therefore, that's exactly where Japan and United States should start. And I would argue that probably at least the United States and Japan would sort of view the sort of strengthened or closer strategic realignment between Beijing and Moscow not in their interest. So that's probably where it should start. Okay. Last, the implication for the regional security. Of course, for Japan, the United States-Japan alliance is a cornerstone of its security strategy, and probably Russia may not see it that way. But at the same time, U.S.-Japan security alliance is not necessarily a threat to Russia. So in that regard, I would think this sort of existing sort of alliance system in East Asia could sort of coexist with some sort of different security dialogue or framework, which might include Russia. So, if it's possible, I mean, we could create some sort of multilateral sort of security dialogue, or maybe track 2 or something like that, where some issues can be discussed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Vasily Kashin. I work for Center for Analysis of Strategies and Technologies. This is a defense industry-related consultancy in Moscow, and also in the Institute of Far Eastern Studies of Russian Academy of Sciences. Thank you for this excellent opportunity to discuss the security policy of Russia with you. I'm more concentrated on the defense-related side of these things, so I will start with general description of our position in Asia-Pacific. Currently, Asia-Pacific is the least problematic region of the world as far as Russian security interests are concerned. We are now facing continuous military buildup in the Eastern Europe. We are expecting major security problems in Central Asia, and there are active military preparations for this. We are engaged in a limited war in Middle East. In Asia-Pacific, we are not part of any local conflicts or rivalries. We are not closely aligned with anyone as far as Asian politics is concerned. We have only one territorial dispute with Japan, which is safely frozen. And even in the longer term, the only country which can potentially pose any kind of threat to Russia is China. And Chinese threat is considered as something of extremely low probability, almost impossible under current political regime in China. We do have active military planning for this possibility, and both Russia and China are engaged into very large-scale intelligence activities against each other, but we don't see that any real threat from Chinese side is likely in the foreseeable future under current political regime. The concerns are caused by the transitional nature of the Chinese political regime, possibility of unexpected changes, rising nationalism, and other negative factors which can take place in a matter of 10 years or even longer perspective. Of course, Russia is conducting necessary preparations for this. We are monitoring the changes in the Chinese nuclear posture, which are significant and which are affecting our nuclear planning. But basically, the main concerns are not related to the military field. The main concerns of Russia are related to our ability to conduct independent policy in the Asia-Pacific. While on the global arena, we have and we will continue increased cooperation with China on a number of international issues like Iran, Syria, some global governance issues. We are not interested in closely aligning with China in Pacific Asia. We are not interested in becoming part of Chinese conflicts with the regional powers. There are examples, very clear examples of our independent policy. For example, we are the country which is arming Vietnam. Vietnamese military buildup is continuing thanks to our weapon systems. We are still the main defense industry partner of India. The Chinese are not always happy with that. Still, we are capable of continuing in this direction. However, the key question is how long we can continue and stay away. We don't have any clear position on South China Sea issue, and we are not supporting any side. East China Sea issue, the same, but everything has its limits. If we talk about Russian turn to the east, you know, there are discussions if it's even happening, but in fact it started like 15 years ago. Like in 2000, the whole volume of Russian-Chinese bilateral trade was something like $8 billion per year. Now it's about $90 billion. At that time, China was little more than 4% of Russian trade volume. Now it's closer to 12%. And after ruble devaluation and decline in our trade with European Union, Chinese share increased. In nominal terms, trade with China declined, but the Chinese share in our external trade increased. What is happening now? Our trade, since we are a commodity exporting country, our trade with Asia Pacific, which is the future for our economy, depends on construction of very large-scale infrastructure projects, including pipelines, seaports, railroads, etc. It's going slowly. It cannot go fast. But if during the next decade, a majority of these projects will be binding us with China, that will necessarily lead to certain political consequences. It will be much more difficult to maintain independent policies in this situation. And then that brings us to clearly a common interest between Russia and Japan. It's in everyone's interest that Russia maintains current neutral status in Asian politics and remains passive. And we are interested in keeping low profile ourselves, although there can be some declarations, summit activities, and etc. We are not interested in actively participating in any of the complicated issues, complicated political and territorial issues in this region. That means that we need to have alternative economic partners in the region, and we need to avoid over-reliance on economic relations with China. The only possible counterbalance in this area is Japan, of course, and developing economic relations and security dialogue with Japan is necessary both for us and for the Japanese side. Of course, it is. This process is currently almost stopped or slowed down because of the situation of Ukrainian crisis and continuing downturn in our relations with the United States. Still, both Russia and Japan will take any possible effort, as I understand, to overcome this. In the longer term, I should say that we have some new possibilities precisely because of the Ukrainian crisis. In general, because of this crisis, Russian government got huge political capital which it can spend. It's huge level of support. Internal politics is a defining factor in our discussions on territorial issues with Japan. Now, at least there is some political capital which could be spent on it if there is some understanding of possible future results. Japan is also becoming more and more important partner for Russia in technological field because the relations with Germany, which used to be our key partner in the developed world, are suffering even now greatly from the Ukrainian situation. So we should see the current crisis basically as an opportunity for everyone to move forward with our relations with the Japanese, and maybe slowly but surely we can turn to a more productive track. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks.
I'll try to be short.
Okay. Thanks, George.
Is somebody's phone in here?
I don't know.
Okay. It's an honor to me to speak in this audience, especially after such distinguished speakers. And it makes my task harder because all the things that I think are true and correct has already been said. So I have to clarify first my message, and this message is very clear. For Russia, its turn to Asia, turn to the East, is a historic necessity, not of just years or decades or maybe for centuries to come. That's my first point. Second is that for Russia, economics are more important in Asia than political security issues, but one cannot be sought without another. And third is that so far Russia policy in the East is more or less China-oriented, and this is not effective. The policy should be diversified, and Japan is one of the obvious addresses of such diversification. In fact, this turn to the East, and Vasily is right, started long ago. And although the Soviet and then Russian policy was mostly West and U.S. centered, and Asia, I think, always played a secondary role. Although Ambassador Panov, who is my former boss, might not agree to that, but I think that still in the 1990s we could not overcome this disparity, and still the Asian policy remained secondary, and we were rather passive in Asia. So the current shift is maybe the biggest one in the foreign policy of Russia after the breakup of Soviet Union. But at the same time, it was prepared. It was prepared for a long time. Some years ago, a term Euro-Pacific power was coined, meaning that Russia is not Eurasian, if we speak about civilizational background, but rather geographically. It's a resident power in Pacific, and it's also a resident power in Europe. So both of these aspects should be taken into account, and Russia should serve both as a bridge and as an active player in both of the region it borders with. Russia has some ideas on the security architecture in Asia and the Pacific. That has been for a long time a matter of Russian conceptual approach. For example, it dates back to Gorbachev's ideas of pan-Asiatic Asian security. And recently, there were initiatives for new security architecture in Asia and the Pacific. It was first voiced together by Russia and China, and then later there was an idea proposed by Russia, China, and Brunei to negotiate first a framework principles of security and cooperation in Asia and the Pacific, and later have a binding legal treaty, which is pretty far off these days, but at least it's not impossible in Asia, unlike the situation we have in Middle East and West. Later, the action plan was presented by Russia, which is based on the very on the ideas that can be really argued with, but the problem is how to get there. Of course, such a Russian approach and Chinese approach, they contradict the US concept of the security system, the hub and spoke system, although even the closest allies of US feel increasing strain because of that, and we know about the sort of policy of Japan. South Korea is trying to get some kind of equality between its American and Chinese direction of its foreign policy. But anyway, when we speak about Asia, Asia for Russia is a little bit abstract notion. Asia and the Pacific is too big for Russia to be at all the places at the same time. And for us, the Northeast Asia is the gate to Asia and the Pacific. And this is where our interest may coincide with that of other actors in the area. We are mostly interested in economic area like energy, logistics, arms and technology expert. But we also need to address the security threat, as I mentioned. So if we speak about territorial issues in Russia, Russia tries to distance itself from both territorial issues and regional debates on history. As it was already mentioned here, that we have no position that on the South China Sea conflict. It's the policy is absence of policy. We are not trying to support any side on the historical debates. Even when Putin was in China for the military parade, which was perceived in Japan as an anti-Japanese, he didn't use this opportunity to point some fingers, although obviously we're against what we call falsification of history. So the only conflict which we are directly involved in, not the conflict, but rather the settlement of the conflict, is the Korean one. Maybe I'm a Korea specialist by my education and spent many years in Korea. Maybe because of that I think this is important, but I do believe that Russia can play its role in Korea. For that we should recognize that for one thing, that only political and diplomatical means can be used for solving this issue, and that unfortunately North Korea is here to stay, and it's a bill on nuclear in North Korea. I think it's very important for Japan as well, and this is one of the areas where we lack cooperation and discussions. I believe that the six-party talks or some kind of multilateral talks should resume with a broader agenda than just North Korean nuclear issue, and only in the process of such negotiations we can find some compromise with the current North Korea regime, because we don't expect to have anything else in the foreseeable future, and make it less belligerent and make it less the situation here less dangerous. Also, if we speak about Northeast Asia, there are ideas to start regional cooperation with the so-called soft issues like disaster management, organized crime, terrorism, health, cybersecurity, etc., migrations, financial stability. And, for example, the idea of South Korea, which is promoted by the current administration of NAPSI, Northeast Asia Peace and Peace Cooperation Initiative. I think it is something that we should both look at. So as I mentioned in the beginning, Russian policy in the Far East shouldn't be, in Northeast Asia, shouldn't be China-centered, and that obviously brings for us the necessity to participate both in multilateral structures like the ones mentioned here, and to build up bilateral relations with the regional powers. When we speak about multilateral structures, unfortunately, there's too many declarations and much less action. For example, Asians took with great dissatisfaction our non-participation on the summit level in the Station Summit, which we tried so hard to enter to, and well, this year it happens again. And when we speak about the countries which are most important for us, there is a list that I think is not inclusive, but this is somewhere we could start with. And also, we are very much interested in the regional economic groupings. For me, it's especially the China, Japan, South Korea. Well, possible free trade area, which Russia should pay more attention at, especially in the view of the recent summit, leaders meeting in Seoul of China, Japan, South Korea. I believe that we should pay more attention to that, maybe try to find some kind of observer status or try to be a part of this regional process. And for all these, I believe that we need to enhance our cooperation with Japan, discussion with Japan, so that the whole agenda shouldn't be kidnapped just by territorial issues, which has been the case for the whole history of the after-war relations. One idea is to broaden the agenda by multilateral issues, like I've mentioned here, by the issues of both security and soft issues, multilateral cooperation. And I think that a kind of separate track for that might be introduced between the governments of two countries. Thank you.
So I'll start the discussion period off with a couple of questions and then open things up to the floor. I'm curious if our Russian colleagues, Vasily and Georgy, could talk about the cognitive dissonance between the very high-minded way that you have portrayed Russia's interests in Asia and what I see as much more of a kind of impulsive and emotional and improvised response to the events of the last 2 years, where there's almost been a jump and a sort of, we need to do this, and a kind of catching up on an issue where, frankly, there had been very little dynamism for the past 10, 15 years. And I'm just curious how you would, if you look at the way it's being handled, does it make you feel that we're in a period where the long-term view that you're describing is going to prevail, or will we stay in this period of constant improvisation and catching up?
We have a proverb in Russian. I don't know how to translate it, but it sounds like that. There would have been no luck if we were not unlucky. In certain places, we were unlucky to have this rift and collision with the West. So obviously this gave a push to our Asian policies. It gave a push for the ideas and concepts which had been long in place. Both for politicians and Russian businesses, when you cut off financing from Europe, when the people are just cannot go to Europe or to US for that matter, if all the cooperation is becoming more and more limited, and if we feel the dissatisfaction and distrust by our partners in the West, well, the obvious way out is go east. Both for personal and for business reasons, when you have a market which hasn't been yet developed and you can do something about it and you have no alternative, that's what you do. I believe it was of course impulsive, but we had a long preparation for that. And to be a more important part of Asia, of course, the crucial thing for Russia is to develop its Far East. There have been a lot of programs, and we now have another one, but this time I believe it's a little bit more well-founded, and there is more investment into the in the special economic zones, and we have very active Minister for Far Eastern Development who is trying to push things there, and who is very active in cooperation with the regional countries. So unlike for the last maybe 25 years, something is happening on the ground. Not to the extent we would like to, but there is some progress. And I do believe that that should be a long-term trend. Although unfortunately, I don't want to be the permanent frost in the relation with the West to be the condition for such a trend. But I do believe that our relations with Asia will develop faster than with the West, and that, maybe 20 years from now, we have what we call the more equality of the two eagles of Russian symbol.
I think that we should make clear distinction between real Russian foreign policy and the rhetoric and propaganda side of foreign policy. In reality, turn to the East started in the late 1990s during the last years of Yeltsin's presidency. We do have steady growth of trade with China, which is outpacing our trade with the West by a significant degree. But this cannot be fast. Why? Because Russia is a commodity exporting country. If you're a commodity exporting country, you're dependent on very expensive infrastructure. Which means that every infrastructure project must be negotiated, especially with Chinese, for something like 5-7 years, and then it takes like 7 or 5 years to build it. The main before the current crisis, we managed to build East Siberia Pacific oil pipeline and agree on its extension. We managed to make significant progress on Power of Siberia gas pipeline, and of course it was signed already after the start of the Ukrainian crisis, but like 90% of the work was done before. Also, if we not just look at the economic side, joint military exercises, ground forces exercises yearly once, large-scale exercises started in 2005, naval exercises started in 2012, also before the Ukrainian crisis when no one could foresee it. So it is a gradual process which cannot be too fast just because we are constrained by infrastructure primarily. And Chinese are very difficult partner for negotiation. Like for everyone, you cannot negotiate infrastructure project fast. But what happened after the start of the Ukrainian crisis is huge rise of rhetoric and a number of new projects on industrial field to substitute former imports from Europe and United States in electronics, industrial equipment and stuff. This is the only new major development. Other projects would continue even without the Ukrainian crisis.
Professor Zumika, I believe both you and Togo-san talked about a fear of Russia becoming a junior partner to China or a sort of under China's wing. Part of what I pick up, and maybe it's a superficial Washington perspective, is a sense of China being preoccupied by other challenges, particularly the economic crisis, the leadership challenges inside of China. So there's not as much energy or desire to do much beyond the kind of PR value and propaganda value that the past 2 years have provided. Where do you think Japanese thinking will evolve if, in some ways, China looks at Russia with less excitement and is almost sort of, this is a second level, third level priority for them? Does that change, you think, the strategic calculus that you talked about at the beginning about looking for ways to build closer ties between Moscow and Tokyo? Does it become less relevant if China is sort of discarding it as an important opportunity as
Right,
Tokyo
right,
potentially
right,
discarded.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. Is the microphone
Yep,
working?
you're on. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people, predict what's going to happen with China, and basically the answer is nobody knows. But I think it's a safe sort of assumption that even with the slower growth, China's significance will remain, and so maybe China will not continue to grow like 8%, 10% annually, but 4%, 5% annual growth is still significant. So in that sense, I don't think the security challenge coming from the China's position, I think will persist. And so in that regard, strategic sort of calculation of Japan when it looks toward Russia probably stay the same unless Russia becomes suddenly sort of aggressive part of the problems in the Pacific. I mean, it's a problem in the Western Front and also towards Central Asia. So that is the problem. But that kind of a problem is not posed yet in the Asia-Pacific area from Russia. So, I mean, as Ambassador Togo and Ambassador Panov already explained, at least so far, Russia and Japan do not see each other as a security threat. And that would create, I think, the sufficient incentive for Tokyo to seek primarily the resolution of the terror issues, and hopefully second-order effect will be the better balance among the China, Japan, Russia sort of relations.
So I hate to quote the famous American political philosopher Woody Allen, but he had this great insight, which was that 90% of life is just showing up, that you just need to be in the room. And when you see the pattern of Russia not showing up and being in the room at the APEC summit and at the East Asia summit, it's hard to take some of these long-term trends and say that you can deliver on them if your leaders are not going to make the personal investment. I'm just curious if Georgi and Vasily could talk a bit about this Russian desire to not be part of the big security discussion. There are obviously very big security challenges in East Asia right now that the countries in the region are focused on. And for Russia to say, oh, that's not our business, we just are here to sell arms and make money on infrastructure and energy, to me, there's a big contradiction. If you take Woody Allen seriously, which I think we have to.
Well, I would rather say I have no comment on that, because I've said that, well, no show for all this important meetings, especially in the eyes of Asian, is a huge shortage of attention, and that's nearing, in fact, the insult. I don't know where it happens. At least all the experts and all the people who are related have been urging our President Putin to be part of this discussion. Maybe it's too far. Maybe there's preoccupation with other issues. But I do believe that unless this is overcome, we cannot be serious enough about turn into ease. And I hope that the situation will change. That's what I can say.
Vasily?
Non-presence on these particular activities was most likely a mistake, although maybe there are some circumstances we don't know, but most likely it was a serious political mistake. However, we should avoid any active participation in which could potentially lead us to taking sides in these discussions. We are not, in general, we are not interested in showing off. We are interested in getting results, which have nothing to do with this, with the nature of these discussions.
Okay. Well, with that, let's open things up for questions. 2 ground rules. It needs to be a question. I have 3 ground rules. 1, it needs to be a question. 2, if you could identify yourself and your affiliation. And 3, if you could wait for the microphone before speaking. Start over here, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Mark Tokolo with the Korea Economic Institute. I've got a question for our 2 Russian panelists. The question is, do you understand the U.S. military presence or presence in Northeast Asia, the U.S.-Japan, U.S.-ROK military alliances, as being stabilizing or destabilizing? Is it better if the U.S. presence continues or diminishes?
I think that it's mostly the question that should be addressed to Chinese, because they are mostly concerned about the Chinese, the U.S. presence, seeing it as a potential threat, especially things like the anti-missile defense development, beefing up the security cooperation, including, Japan, Australia, and USA. These things, they do make Chinese nervous, and in this sense, they're destabilizing. And it also leads to arms race in the region, and which again causes response from the U.S. And I do believe this spiral should be somehow stopped. So I do not think that it is technically possible or realistic to expect U.S. withdrawal from Asia, military withdrawal. For example, speaking about Korea, the whole concept of the Korean security is based on the U.S. presence there. But I don't think that this is a factor which is very much conducive for cooperation in Asia.
So.
U.S. military withdrawal from East Asia means U.S. political withdrawal from East Asia, and that means that U.S. ceases to be a superpower. So it's something unavoidable. It doesn't affect our interests. It's mainly a problem for the Chinese. I don't think Russia will be interested in taking very active position on this.
Admiral Blair.
See, a question for our Russian panelist. Izumikawa-san, in his paper, showed this increasing pattern of Russian sea and air violations of, or not violations, or let me put it the other way, Japanese intercepts of Russian activities. How do you square that with the relatively benign and normal picture of Russian policy in Asia that you portrayed? Because certainly that is part of what's whipping up Japanese suspicion of Russia as it is worldwide, and yet it doesn't really accomplish much militarily. I can tell you as a guy who used to run those kind of operations. So what's going on?
Yes, I think this is a byproduct of general huge growth of activity in the Russian military. We have very significant growth in flying hour, at sea rate for the ships. The intensiveness of training has been growing quite fast since 2009, and I think this is more a byproduct of these activities. Maybe this should be discussed with the Japanese and be subject for some negotiations, but I don't think that Russia really wants to pressure Japanese militarily or politically by these activities. We have this huge growth of training all around the border. You can see basically the same in Eastern Europe, in everywhere. And maybe we need to make certain adjustments, because when you have very fast growth of such activities, first you have greater number of accidents and second, greater number of various mistakes that's sometimes unavoidable.
So I'm glad you mentioned the mistakes and the risk of accidents and the possibility for dialogue. But my understanding, at least if you look at the European side of this, is that requests for those kinds of dialogue and worry about mistakes have both been moving in other directions. There's the Western desire for a conversation has been rebuffed by Russian counterparts, and there's been a series of incidents, which I don't need to rehearse, but in the Baltics and in Scandinavia that make one very nervous. And it seems like we're just seeing the same pattern of signaling, of some kind of strategic signaling here, as opposed to just a natural increase in military operations. Is there a signal?
No, well, what I wanted to say is that you said that showing off is the most important thing. I don't say
Showing
that
up. Showing up.
showing up and showing off.
Okay.
And showing off and showing up, both of them. So I don't say that Russians want to show off with their jet fighters instead of their, well, dignitaries. But I want to say that the Russian military, especially the Far East, they want to show up and show off to the bosses, that they're not just sitting idly, but they're doing something, that they need also investment, promotions, etc., etc. So if something's happening in Europe, it has to be something happen in here, although the situation here is much less tense than, well, the potential for it in Europe.
Okay. Sir.
大輔ベル特許ファンデーション I'd like to make a short comment on what...
With a question.
Yes,
But
yes,
it needs to be a question.
yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Excuse me.
Question.
So just add a question at the end of the comment. Okay.
I mean, you know, in order to more clearly understand the current trend of the both countries' effort to improve the relationship, I think that we should pay attention to not the administration, but the previous administration, the end of the previous administration. In my view, in 2012, that was a kind of turning point of the Japan-Russia relationship. I was a member of the study group on Japan-Russia relationship gathered by the Cabinet Secretariat, DPG government, and we closely watched what is going on between Japan and Russia. And one of the turning point was in July, Foreign Minister Gemba visited Sochi and met Lavrov and Putin. And it was interesting was that before President Putin received the Vietnam's president, and Russian government sent Nikolai Patrushev to Japan in October 2012, and Nikolai Patrushev, after visiting Tokyo, he went to Vietnam. As Vasilikashi mentioned, that Vietnam and Japan is kind of the countries that Russia could show that some kind of independence policy toward China. In this sense, this kind of trend of Japan-Russia relationship started not under the Abe administration, but under the previous administration.
Alex Gabuev.
I'm Alex Gabuev with the Carnegie Endowment. Vasily, you mentioned that after our adventure in Crimea, Russia has some political capital to spend. Do you feel the desire of Putin government to spend it on Russia-Japan relationship? Because what do you hear in Moscow conversations with the economic bloc. Like a lot of high-level people would hope that Vladimir Vladimirovich could spend this on structural reforms, of which we were talking about for the last 5 years at least, and nothing had happened. So do you feel this desire to spend it on foreign policy? Thanks.
I think that key obstacle to any territorial resolution was fear from both governments of being accused of being weak. We can recall our territorial agreement with China, which was hugely successful for us, but the criticism in the Russian society was huge. In fact, the agreement was hugely damaging for Putin's credibility and Russian government's position in the country, although for Russia it was clearly victory. Of course, any possible agreement with the Japanese would be even more complicated. And in this situation, it is quite good that, we had Crimea, we had Donbass war, we had Syrian operation. When it's hard to doubt that you are not, it's hard for anyone to doubt your, toughness and ability to be very assertive. So yes, in this situation you can make certain concessions. You just need to see what the results are. And also we should always remember another positive example of territorial negotiations involving Russia. A couple of years ago we had very successful solution of our dispute with Norway. It didn't involve any islands, but there was huge area of the sea which was rich with natural resources, and we just quietly negotiated and solved this. And this happened because there was no unnecessary attention from the public to the negotiations, and the agreement was rather complicated. They couldn't understand it. So if there is political will and we can make the agreement as complicated as possible, so no one can read it through, like 6,000, pages, then maybe we can reach certain results.
Okay, all the way in the back. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Paul Joyle, NSI. I wanted to follow up on the comment about showing up and showing off. I find it a bit troubling to indicate that is the implication of that statement that the Russian military is outside of the full control of the political and diplomatic capabilities of the state to be able to engage in such reckless behavior as challenging the territorial integrity of another country?
No, of course not. That's not what I meant, and it's not done on purpose. Believe me. And of course, they're in full control of the political leadership. Please do not make any implications like that.
Okay. Sir.
Gil Rosman, the Asan Forum. From our Russian speakers, I'm wondering if Russia is signaling with pressure to Japan by the visit of Prime Minister Medvedev to the islands and then the declaration that a military base is going to be established on the islands. There are also hints of other types of pressure. Is this a strategy to warn Japan of worse to come? And does anyone really have a good sense of who's driving this, who's planning whatever these measures are, and could also comment on the timing of them, because on the Japanese side they were hoping for a meeting with President Putin this year, and those activities have made it much more difficult for the Japanese side.
Yes.
Sure.
First of all, I should note that military base on the South Kuril island existed always since since the early Soviet period. The 18th division there was established decades ago. What happened during the last several years, there were several programs of rearmament of these units which were publicly declared. Before they were not publicly declared. At this situation, certain political figures, especially including our current Prime Minister Medvedev, saw it as a way to show everyone their toughness and patriotism. But what is happening in reality is absolutely normal process of replacing all old equipment in these units to the new one. The size of our forces on South Kuril Islands is not changing considerably. We are not making any military pressure on Japan. There is growing pattern of our activities. It's growing everywhere. In Europe it's different, I would agree, because in Europe we are maintaining certain level of tension in response to US behavior in Eastern Europe, which we find unacceptable, and increased pattern of our exercises will just continue as long as US presence in Baltic states and Poland continues at current level. With Japan, it's absolutely different. There used to be unintended small violations, but you know, when the general pattern of exercises is like becoming more intensive, that becomes more frequent. Probably we just need to discuss that and agree on certain code of conduct.
Okay, do you want to add to that?
I think so.
Okay, but just to pin you down, I can't remember which of your papers talked about the good cop, bad cop aspect of this, which was that Medvedev has closely identified himself with the Kurils and has crossed over certain patterns of behavior by being there physically and showing up. Is that a signaling, or is that just a pet, it's a pet issue that he's adopted it?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Well, simply said, I have no answer for that. Of course, that kind of activity, this kind of visits are all decided at the highest level. He's not doing that by himself. And if this is considered a normal thing, well, maybe it's better to send the Medvedev, who is, well, in the Russian establishment, sort of a dove, rather than some kind of a hawk. Which would be even more important, would have more negative implications. But, well, if there is a need to make a statement, there is a need to do it.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, sir.
Steve Winters, consultant. I get to the Russians. Would you imagine that there's a perception in Japan, or could be a perception in Japan, that China and Russia, the militaries in particular now, are operating in tandem? For example, the press reported weeks and weeks ago that maybe there was an informal agreement. Russia would sort of take care of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, whereas the Chinese would be focusing on the Pacific, despite the fact, of course, Chinese are doing exercises in the Mediterranean, and Russians are doing exercise with Chinese in the northern. But nevertheless, there was this report that there was this, well, we've only got 50 ships, that's the Russians, and you've got so many ships, and, the Americans have more than both of us, and so forth and so on. So sort of a division of labor, and then the perception, well, Russians are being aggressive, well, we've got Crimea, and now China's being aggressive, South China Sea. It's sort of like working in tandem, sort of covering the whole periphery, and of course, probably the response of Japan to that is to focus on trying to develop some connections in Southeast Asia. But can you see a certain rationale for that? So when you say that, oh, well, we've got this sort of, we don't want to get involved in all this trouble in Asia and so forth and so on. Well, yeah, because your part of the tandem is to focus on the other side, and also the missile shield. Russia's pressuring the U.S. on the missile shield and the European allies, whereas China's pressuring the missile shield in terms of what the U.S. is trying to build in South Korea, so forth and so on. So I think that might be the perception.
Well, first of all, I should say that I don't think any such division of labor and joint line towards Japan is possible. First of all, we should note that the Chinese are still not recognizing our claim on South Kuril Islands, and we are not recognizing their claim on Senkaku Islands. It would be just logical if we wanted to establish a common line towards Japan on territorial issue that we would first recognize each other's claims. No, it's not happening, and it's not even discussed. Only some nationalistic Chinese writers are suggesting that, but they're minority in Russia. No one is even talking about that. We don't have any significant security issues in Asia Pacific. We do have them in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, so this is where our activity happens. As for missile shield, well, it's quite natural that both Russia and China, being nuclear powers, want to prevent, or at least don't like, US establishing a strategic missile defense. Of course, this issue is much, much more significant for the Chinese because their nuclear forces are smaller and less sophisticated than ours, but still, of course, we both are concerned, and on this issue, we have been working together for many years. Since 1990s, I think we were coordinating our positions on missile defense. That's natural, just like on many, many other international issues. Yes.
Georgi, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I just wanted to add that, well, this is a kind of, well, theory university professors love to formulate, which I also happen to be one, but in reality, that's not how the things are done. Every government has limited resources, and it spends its resources, both political and military, and it spends its resources on the issues that are most important. Of course, Europe for us is much more important, and South China Sea, Asia is much more important for China. And there is a general, not understanding, but a normal practice when, even at the United Nations, when, for example, Korean problem is discussed, we give Chinese the first, the possibility to be soloists. When Syria is discussed, they give us as a permanent member of the United Nations. But there's nothing artificial about that. It's just the normal, balance and power in the whole of Eurasia.
Please.
Thank you very much. I have a question to Professor Toloraya, particularly in relation to the slide which you are showing over there. I assume that this gives the kind of major perspective of the views of regional cooperation from Russian perspectives, but it seems to me that there is one organization which is missing there. And this is a conference on interdependence and confidence-building measures in Asia, SICA. That is certainly a China-centered organization. But in order to understand what China is trying to do, I have always thought that this SICA could have an importance because it precisely overlaps the latest Chinese vision of one road, one belt and one road. It connects Beijing to Europe. But then how Russia views this organization, and clearly Russia is number two, if China, we can call China number one in this organization. Do you place certain importance to this organization?
Well, for one thing, there's such a spaghetti bowl or udon bowl of organizations in Asia and the Pacific that you cannot enumerate, and you cannot sometimes separate the functions of all of them. We sort of made our mind that East Asian Summit mechanism should be central, and with ASEAN centrality as ASEAN at the driving seat in Asia Pacific. The SIGA you're talking about, it's more related to Central Asia and not so much Asia and the Pacific. That's why I didn't mention it. But well, this whole issue of one belt, one road concept and Eurasian bridge, it's too big just to start discussion now, I think, because it's a little bit of a different issue.
Jeffrey Hornung, Sasakawa, USA. It seems like a lot of the discussions that we have when it comes to security, we talk a lot about the differences between Japan and Russia and possible areas of tension or confrontation. I want to switch that and ask about a possible area for conversion of interests, the Arctic. Russia is a member of the Arctic Council. Japan now is one of 5 Asian observer states in the Arctic Council. Do you see any possibility of Russia and Japan cooperating on issues of the Arctic, such as possible development, code of conduct, maybe when the ice melts more? Any areas that you see that the two countries could actually come together in this area?
Vasily Georgiev.
I'm basically not like closely following our relations with Japan on Arctic, so I maybe.
Well, you know, Arctic, and this is a very delicate issue, and I also don't know the exact, state of affairs in relation with China and Japan, but I think that there should be more cooperation on this thing called global commons, not only Arctic but other issues, and this is. That was one of the messages I put in my presentation, that the agenda of Russia-Japanese relations shouldn't be kidnapped by bilateral issues, that it should be broadened for more multilateral issues and soft issues which can be discussed without that kind of animation we have when we discuss territorial issues or non-existence of territorial issues.
Yeah, let me add to that. My knowledge about this issue is also limited, but I think it was Russia that supported Japan's membership in the Arctic Council, and that was viewed as one of the signs from Tokyo's viewpoint that Russia is somehow sort of worried about China's entering into the Arctic Ocean. I mean, could be right, could be wrong, we don't know. Actually, before coming here, I had a chance to talk about this Arctic issue with the energy expert. And according to these people, as the way the price of oil goes right now, the development in the Arctic is a kind of non-starter right now. So maybe that sort of dynamic is kind of like stalled, at least right now.
So I'm conscious that we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to take the next 3 questions together, if I could. So all the way right there in the back.
Hi, Mark Mannion from the Congressional Research Service. Izumikawa-sensei, can you hear me?
A little bit louder.
Okay. I'm curious, now that Russia's isolation has started to ease up, how specifically do you see that Japan can reduce Russia's dependence on China? I'm just particularly interested in specifics. In other words, how does Japan really have enough influence to change Russia's strategy, a global strategy?
And Steve Blank.
Yes, Stephen Blank, American Foreign Policy Council. My question is for Dr. Kashin. I was somewhat confused by your statement that Russia did not support China's position on the Senkakus because 5 years ago, President Medvedev and Hu Jintao signed an agreement where both sides claimed to recognize the other's territorial claims stemming from the Second World War, which implies China's support for Russia's position on the Kurils and Russia's support for China on the Senkakus. Does your statement mean that Russia has walked away from that?
And then you, sir, here. One last question.
I'm Young Kim, GWU. To what extent, if any, does the level of tensions between China and Japan serve as a constraint on Russia from developing closer relations with Japan?
Okay. Uzumakawa-san.
Okay. How could Japan support reducing Russia's dependence on China? Well, one specific way, I guess, I mean, this is more of economics rather than security, is probably, you know, the sort of increase in the energy cooperation. Especially Japan is interested in importing natural gas for obvious reasons. It's been difficult to reopen the nuclear reactors, even though it has started. So that's one way, one specific way. But more generally, I think, well, I think my colleagues here from Russia has already pointed out that the diversification of Russia's options in the in Asia Pacific is important, and Japan can be an important player in that regard, I think. Okay. And I guess going back to the Professor Kim's question, I'm not sure I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but well, I mean, the China factor is really significant in terms of the driving Japan's policy, especially Prime Minister Abe's policy toward Russia. And I guess we can talk about that later.
Yes, during President Medvedev's visit to China and during some subsequent joint declarations, we on a number of times mentioned that we recognize the results of the World War II, and there was a number of statements on history of World War II, but we never recognized each other's territorial claims. Chinese never recognized, and you can just look at any Chinese map. Our claim, Chinese map, mentioned South Kuril Islands as occupied by Russia or controlled by Russia. The same is with Senkaku. It's like it's the state of the affairs. And yes, I should say that, of course, Chinese factor is not the only one which lead us to increased relations with Japan. Japan is now probably currently Japan is our best partner among G7, because the relations with Europe are more or less undermined by the Ukrainian crisis. Ukrainian crisis is something, as a factor, is something which will stay with us for decades. It's permanent, so there will be always significant difficulties in our deals with Europe. We need partner in technology, investment, and that is why Japan is increasingly important. Japan and South Korea, and these two countries are like direction of growing diplomatic activity for us.
So I think that's a hopeful note, and I think that we should stop there. I appreciate the contributions from all three of you. I think Jeff will come up in a second and describe where we go next, but thank you all three for this really stimulating panel.
Okay, everyone, just to let you know where we're going from here, from 12:30 from now until 1:15, we will have lunch served outside here, and I ask you to come back here at 1:15. We have a wonderful luncheon address by Eugene Rumer, the Director and Senior Associate of the Russia and Eurasia Program here at Carnegie. Thank you.
So that rest over here?
What?
That rest will take place here?
The next session? Yeah.
No.
Lunch? Yeah, lunch is right there.